Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I'm Peninah Karibe in Nairobi. There's plenty coming up this hour, including these stories. Losing its luster, gold prices take the largest annual tumble in over 3 decades. And Michael Schumacher's condition improves after undergoing second brain operation. The United Nations has accused both parties in the ongoing conflict in South Sudan of committing what it describes as terrible acts of violence. The UN Special Representative for South Sudan, Hilde Johnson, said there was evidence of ethnic targeting in the fighting. She urged both forces to bring the country back from the brink. Fighting between government troops and militias loyal to former Vice President Riek Machar continued to rage in Bor, the capital of the vast Jonglei state and site of an ethnic massacre in 1991. Johnson warned the crisis could stretch the UN mission in South Sudan beyond its current resources. More than 1,000 people have already been killed in the violence.
We have seen terrible acts of violence in the past 2 weeks. There has been killings and brutality, grave human rights violations and atrocities committed. We have seen evidence of apparent ethnic or targeting of South Sudanese citizens on ethnic grounds. This can lead to a perpetual cycle of violence that can destroy the fabric of the new nation. We need to do everything possible to prevent such a cycle of violence between the communities of South Sudan.
After initial indications that truce talks may not take off, negotiators from both the South Sudanese government and rebels are heading to the Ethiopia's capital. Already, a delegation from the rebels is in Addis Ababa. CCTV's Grim Chala has more.
Officials here in Addis are still hoping talks can help end the bloodshed, but they're also realistic. Overnight, Foreign Minister Tedros Adhanom warned the fighting in Bor could delay things. And if and when talks do get underway, there is a huge gulf to bridge. South Sudanese leader Salva Kiir insists he won't share power. Rebel leader Riek Machar says there will be no ceasefire until he gets his way. He is refusing even to meet President Kiir. Officials say it may be Thursday before talks do actually begin. The delay and the confusion is certainly not encouraging. Grumdala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's now cross over to Juba. CCTV's Kofa Mrenje is joining us from there live. Kofa, we know the negotiating team for the rebel is already in the Ethiopian capital. Do we know if the government delegation for the peace talks has left for Addis Ababa?
Well, Peninah, senior government officials here were in and out of meetings for the better part of the day today. Probably trying to discuss on who would be in that delegation and who will not be. At some point, people started getting worried on whether that team would leave Juba here for Addis Ababa as it was anticipated. However, by late afternoon, government officials were quoted as saying that a team of 14 delegates had left Juba for Addis Ababa. The head of the UN mission here in South Sudan, Hilde Johnson, also confirmed late this evening that indeed that team was on the way to Addis.
And Kofa, judging by developments in the country, are the scheduled talks likely to end the ongoing violence?
Well, that really depends on how the talks go in Addis Ababa. But analysts are already predicting that the talks will be tough and probably would take some time. They say it depends on what both sides put on the table. For example, the former Vice President Riek Machar says he is not ready to let his boys put their arms down. He also says that he is not ready to meet the president face to face. The president on the other side says he is not ready to share power. So there are a couple of things that could make the talks tough. So really, it depends on what every side puts on the table. And for now, everyone here, especially in Juba, has their eyes in Addis to see whether the talks will kick off in the first place and how the talks will go. in the coming few days.
Kofa, the UN is also worried about the worsening humanitarian situation. How are the internally displaced coping?
Well, the situation in the camps that we have visited ourselves is tough. And what is going on in the Bor for the past few days has made the situation even worse. More than 180,000 people have been displaced. The numbers are going up in the camps by the day, especially after what has been going on in Bor. And therefore, aid organizations are stretched at this moment. They are running out of supplies. The UN has also sent out an appeal for donors to come in and give donations in order to allow aid organizations to cope with the situation. It's tough. It's tough. It's tough. That's the word that can describe the situation, especially in the camps.
All right, Kofa Mrenje there live for us in Juba. Thanks, Kofa, for joining us. Meanwhile, fighting continues to rage in South Sudan. Former Vice President Riek Machar says his troops will march on the capital, Juba, after retaking the flashpoint town of Bor. The United Nations is raising concerns of ongoing atrocities across the country. And as CCTV's Carol Loyola reports, plans are underway to deploy more officers to maintain law and order in the volatile country.
The government of South Sudan and rebel leaders have agreed to attend peace talks in Ethiopia. On Tuesday, the U.S. Special Envoy to South Sudan, Donald Booth, said that this commitment by both sides was a step in the right direction.
I see this commitment to send negotiators to Addis as a first step, but a very important step, toward achieving a cessation of hostilities and a beginning to negotiations to resolve the underlying political issues which have led to the violence that has gripped South Sudan for the past 2 weeks. I will continue to remain engaged with the government of South Sudan, with all other parties and partners who are working to try to achieve a peaceful outcome of this conflict.
The South Sudanese Foreign Affairs Minister also confirmed that a delegation of negotiators appointed by President Salva Kiir was set to travel to Ethiopia.
So we are for dialogue, unconditional dialogue without any conditions. It was the other side putting conditions and refusing to send a team of their own. They were refusing equally for the cessation of hostilities. The president has been on record and he said, we don't want the people of South Sudan to die again in a senseless war.
Meanwhile, the mayor of the flashpoint town of Bor has confirmed that rebel fighters have seized the town after intense fighting on Tuesday. The mayor claims that the South Sudanese army has made a tactical retreat to Malwal Chat Army Barracks, 3 kilometers south of the town. More United Nations police are expected to maintain law and order in South Sudan.
Yeah, currently we are trying to work out their deployments, but all in all I can say is that we'll be deploying them in the places where the civilians, they have come to our UNMISS camps and are taking shelter. So that basically would be places like Malakal, Bo, and other places.
About 9,000 civilians are seeking refuge at the UN base in Bor. Carol Oyola, CCTV.
Malakal, the capital of Upper Nile, one of South Sudan's 2 main oil-producing states, has seen fierce fighting, and evacuation of foreigners is proving difficult. Many are trapped in UN camps as they wait to be flown to Juba to be taken home. Although an uneasy calm has been restored in Juba, violence persists in other parts of South Sudan. The South Sudanese Army spokesman says rebel forces still control the oil-producing center of Bentiu. According to the UN, the fighting has displaced up to 180,000 people.
The scale of the crisis has challenged an already overstretched mission. We now have approximately 68,000 people that have sought refuge in our camps. And they are in 13 different locations all over the country, or in the 3 major states, first and foremost. The numbers fluctuate, so we've been up to 75,000. In some places, people are returning. In other places, people come in, so they go back and forth. And it is very clear to us, we must not only protect civilians in our compounds and our camps, we must also be able to protect them out there where they are at risk.
I think they're trying. They're all aware that we're here. We were put on an evacuation list. So they're doing what they can do, and I understand they have procedures, but I would think in a time of war somebody could do something. If we're trying to protect children, then this isn't the place to do it.
In Madagascar, provisional results of the presidential election runoff gave former Finance Minister Henry Rajaonarimampianina the victory. The Electoral Commission attributed more than 53% of the December 20th vote to Rajaonarimampianina, with ballots counted in more than 99% of polling stations. The camp of his opponent, Jean-Louis Robinson, has claimed the election was rigged, reviving memories of contested polls that have led to violence in the past. The election, the first since former disc jockey Andy Rajoelina ousted then-President Marc Ravalomanana in 2009 with the help of the military, is meant to end a political crisis that has driven out investors, cut aid flows and sharply slowed the economy. You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a break. Coming up. Friendship call. 2 Chinese warships conclude a goodwill visit to Tanzania. And wretched of the earth, the struggles of people displaced by the violence in Central African Republic. Two Chinese warships have just completed a goodwill visit to Tanzania. They're part of a fleet that's been protecting ships against pirates in the Gulf of Aden. The ships are now heading to the Kenyan port of Mombasa. CCTV's Leo Liang has the story.
The amphibious docked landing ship Jingangshan and the guided missile frigate Heng Shui docked at Dar es Salaam this past weekend. More than 400 people welcomed the ships. Local artists performed traditional dances, and people also were allowed on board.
Representatives of staff members of China-funded institutions, Chinese nationals in Tanzania and the Tanzanian Navy, as well as local people from all walks of life are gathering here to give the fleet a warm welcome.
In the past 4 days, the Chinese officers and troops have held a series of activities with their Tanzanian counterparts, including visiting each other's ships and demonstrating their training skills.
Friendly exchange is an important part of China-Tanzania bilateral and military ties. Once again, I'm leading the task force to visit Tanzania. This is to further develop bilateral relations. The visit will be a new chapter for our brotherly ties.
Chinese warships have been patrolling the Gulf of Aden since 2008. The latest escort mission began in August, made up of 3 ships and 3 helicopters. They have safeguarded 181 Chinese and foreign vessels against pirate threats.
They sailed from the Gulf of Aden, where they were dealing with piracy and terrorism issues. The Indian Ocean is one of the places known as a hotspot for piracy. That is why they had to pass through all these places. It's a benefit for us because we share the ocean.
Dar es Salaam is an important port for the region, and relations with China go back hundreds of years. As early as the 15th century, Zheng He, the great Chinese navigator, visited here. More recently, the Chinese Navy's destroyer Shenzhen and the medic ship Peace Ark and the 7th Escort Task Force have been here for goodwill visits. Liao Liang, CCTV.
More than 1,000 people occupied the runway of the Central African Republic's International Airport on Tuesday in an appeal to authorities to provide assistance to those displaced by interreligious violence. Flights were suspended early on Tuesday because of the occupation, according to two aid workers, although one of the sources said they later resumed after the crowds dispersed. French troops kept the protesters under control in what appeared to be a largely peaceful protest. A flare-up in violence between Muslim former Seleka rebels and Christian militias since early December has driven at least 100,000 people to seek refuge in the makeshift camp.
We Central Africans have suffered too much. We've spent almost a month here without a solution. And that's why we have come to overrun the runway, so that President Jotodia leaves power.
And as the violent clashes continue in parts of the Central African Republic, concern is growing for the safety and security of hundreds of thousands of displaced people. The internal refugees are increasingly in danger of exploitation by armed groups and even unscrupulous traders keen to make illicit profits from relief supplies. Susan Mungeli reports.
With so many displaced people and no formal policing, civilians are increasingly becoming vulnerable to armed groups. Many have subsequently become dependent on militias, either Christian or Muslim, for their safety.
When we want to start sharing food, the young guys come with machetes and attack the old women and grab what the NGOs have given. This is not good.
More than 710,000 people have been uprooted within the Central African nation since the crisis started a year ago. This includes 214,000 internally displaced people in the capital, Bangui. Many Christians have sought refuge in schools, churches, and at the airport, while an estimated 35,000 displaced Muslims are mainly living with host families. More than 40,000 displaced people have taken refuge at the Mpoko International Airport, where many have turned it into their trading area. The United Nations and other donors have been distributing tents, blankets, sleeping mats and other relief items to ease the suffering of the people in the displaced sites. The traders say their safety in Bangui is not guaranteed by the foreign military intervention.
We were city traders, but with those events, we took away our goods to sell them here, just to be able to find some food. There is no money, no help.
Local leaders say they are hopeful that disarmament will take place in the conflict areas so that the displaced can safely return to their homes. Susan Mungeli, CCTV.
A French Catholic priest kidnapped in northern Cameroon last month arrived in the capital Yaoundé on Tuesday after his release a day earlier. He said he had spent the weeks in captivity pacing his tent prison, torn by a mixture of boredom and anger. The November 13th kidnapping of Georges Van de Bush was one of a series of attacks on French targets in Africa after France launched a military intervention in Mali in January to drive out Al-Qaeda Islamists who had forged links with Boko Haram militants. He had chosen to remain as a priest in northern Cameroon, a zone where Nigerian Islamist sect Boko Haram is known to operate despite the security threat. France said it had not paid any ransom for his release.
L'ennui, terrible.
Terrible boredom, sadness and anger, because I'm very attached to the people in the parish where I was a curator, attached to all my parishioners, all the residents, Catholics, but all the others, Christians, Protestants, Muslims, people of all traditional religions. All these people, even in a short space of time of 2.5 years, I've attached myself a lot. It was sadness and anger to be separated from them. And by the grace of God, from time to time, a little peace. But I was sure that many people thought of me, worked and prayed for everything to turn out okay.
The Palestinian group Hamas has condemned Egypt's designation of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group last week, reaffirming its solidarity with the ousted movement despite a crippling blockade imposed by Cairo. Ismail Haniyeh, Prime Minister of the Hamas Gaza government, also snubbed calls by some rival Palestinian factions to sever its connections with the Brotherhood. Egyptian prosecutors and officials say the Muslim Brotherhood has links with domestic Islamist militants who have stepped up attacks on security forces across the country.
We reject such a classification for the Muslim Brotherhood group. No one, regardless of their influence, can push Hamas or any other Palestinian resistance factions to abandon their ideology, abandon their history.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take another break coming up. Hello 2014, how celebrations to usher in the new year was staged across Africa and the rest of the world. Morocco's vast coastline, running to 3,000 kilometers along the Mediterranean Sea, as well as the Atlantic Ocean, is the lifeline of the country's fishermen. But the often rough waters can also be hazardous and even deadly. CCTV's Maria Galang tells us more.
Youssef Sabi from Tifnit village, 45 kilometers from the resort town of Agadir, knows the dangers of Morocco's choppy coastline only too well. He lost 2 colleagues during a fishing expedition last winter that he says he will never forget.
We noticed that the wind was getting stronger. We decided to wait a little bit until it died down before heading to the beach, but all hell broke loose. The boat capsized because of a very high wave and we lost everything. One of my colleagues resisted for a while before disappearing, while I lost sight of the second one when the trawler capsized.
There are more than 18,000 fishing trawlers at nearly 170 ports in Morocco. But most of them are made of wood and are powered by small engines. In 2008, the government earmarked some $90 million to launch the Ibhar sailing program. The project was aimed at improving working conditions in the sector through the introduction of a new generation of ships, fitting 16,000 boats with conservation equipment and upgrading 1,800 boats.
The
Ibhar program deals essentially with the security of fishermen. It deals with providing them with UHF radios and GPS systems, and also with sensors to enhance the performance of trawlers when fishing and knowing where they are and when at work.
Traditional fishermen are now organized into local cooperatives that benefit from various government initiatives, such as modern fish markets and infrastructure. But the Tifnit cooperative, with its 450 members, says a lot more needs to be done to improve their working conditions.
There are some problems and we hope to solve them with the relevant authorities. Today we don't have fishermen's village where fishermen can live. We also have the issue of a jetty that could break the waves. Because we don't have one, fishermen are out of work for nearly 5 or 6 months a year.
Some members, however, said they had gained a lot from the cooperative.
The cooperative is good, and so is the entire project. The tractor is very useful because we don't suffer as we used to do in the past. We still need to have subsidized petrol, while the fish prices should be higher.
Traditional fishing is an important component of Morocco's economy, directly employing nearly 500,000 people. Maria Galang, CCTV.
To some festivities now, and Africans across the continent gathered to usher in the new year with fireworks, music and dance. There are bright hopes for the year ahead, and 2014 already looks promising for many Africans. Here's CCTV's Maria Galang with more.
Happy New Year! A fresh year ahead for Africa. Crowds gathered in public places across the continent's big cities to ring in the new year with fanfare and colour. In downtown Johannesburg, thousands came to party in Newtown Precinct, entertained by some of the country's best DJs. many eager to embark on new endeavors.
My main thing is like to start a business, because that's the thing we need, like in South Africa. There's no more jobs, so we need more businesses.
As an individual, obviously is to survive, but I hope in general that we have a whole lot more peace around the world, and that we as a country can take a few steps in the right direction.
In Uganda's capital, Kampala, fireworks crackled through the night skies at midnight as revelers celebrated the first moment of 2014, expressing their hopes for the year ahead.
I expect a lot, of course, with school and academics to improve, for our country, that it will be better, there will be peace, because it hasn't been all that well. Looking at the economy, death rates were actually increasing, which was not good, but we still thank God that we are still alive. But comparing 2014 being an even year, we look forward to a better year.
And in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, thousands converged at the Safaricom Heroes Stadium, treated to a free concert by popular musicians from around the country. For a continent that's seen its fair share of ups and downs in the past year, the main hope across the board is to see the peace prevail and fortunes grow in 2014. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Elsewhere, celebrations were staged in many cities to welcome in the new year. Brazilians enjoyed music and fireworks, while Germans gathered at one of the largest opening parties in the world. In Australia, people enjoyed a 12-minute fantastic fireworks display. Wu Haojun has more.
Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro, a moment full of music and fireworks. More than 2 million people swarmed in to welcome the new year. Performances from Brazil's most popular artists and samba troupes added to the huge excitement. Fireworks launched from 20 boats lit up the sky for 16 minutes. In London, 2014 was ushered in to the chimes of Big Ben. Fireworks were set off by the London Eye on the south bank of the River Thames. Peach-flavored snow and edible banana confetti fell on the tens of thousands of revelers along the embankment in what's described as the world's first multi-sensory fireworks display. In Germany, about 6,000 rockets were launched. The country's largest New Year's Eve jamboree was held in front of Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. Hundreds of thousands of visitors gathered along the 17th June street with performances by local singers and bands. Dubai welcomed the new year with a stunning display of 400,000 fireworks. As the clock struck midnight, a 6-minute show illuminated the skies.
It is a very beautiful show. I've been here for 7 years. This is the best that I have seen.
In Seoul, thousands gathered for the New Year countdown and the traditional ringing ceremony. The crowd at the Bosingak Bell Tower counted down to midnight. They cheered as the bell tolled.
In 2014, I hope that South Korea will be a country where all live well, and those who are poor and in difficulty will live happily, and all the people will be united so that the country can progress.
In Japan, temple bells rang out in Tokyo, heralding in the new year. Around the country, many people prayed, ringing bells and tossing coins as offerings at shrines, wishing for health, wealth, and happiness. Exploding fireworks also sprayed from the sails of the Sydney Opera House and the Australian city's Harbour Bridge. More than 1 million people crammed the site at midnight and enjoyed a 12-minute display. Wu Haojun, CCTV.